Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We've called it the Marketing's New Playbook. And just to set this up for everybody, I think the question that a few of us have been talking about for some time is really, to paraphrase it, whether or not the rules of marketing have changed, which on the surface of it, perhaps it seems a simple enough question. I suppose at some level, this feels like there's a lot of change. But on the one hand, if you think more deeply into this topic, so-called, marketing academics, perhaps like Mark Ritson and Byron Sharp and Les Binet and Peter Field and others, actually are using data of effectiveness to show that really the long-term branding, emotion, creativity, and broadcast media remain the most potent elements in the marketer's toolkit, right? Yet the industry that we're all in seems to be telling a different story, at least in business terms. Creative agencies have lost their stature, certainly in terms of size, and are arguably managing decline, perhaps, which might be a little tough to say or to admit, but we can hear from the agencies their point of view on that another time, perhaps. But one thing for sure is that the MarTech industry, the marketing technology industry, is booming. It's really dominated a lot of seminars and marketing conferences over the past many years. And companies, there's so many around, Adobe and Salesforce are producing record earnings. I think Salesforce just came out, I think it was last week, announcing record quarterly earnings. And they've got a narrative that is really kind of running counter to some of these things that the marketing theorists are saying are true, like things like segmentation is over, you don't need that anymore, broadcast storytelling doesn't work, they're all old-fashioned and they're effectively dead, right, as tools in the marketer's toolkit. So their proposition seems to be that technology has really changed the rules of marketing, and that the old rules that perhaps we learned in university and others think still apply, no longer apply. So whilst change is our constant companion, as we all know, and this is what we all know to be true, perhaps the real question is to understand the nature of the change. Is this change fundamental, or is it more superficial and mostly about media channels and platforms rather than what's driving marketing effectiveness itself? So to help us to understand if today's marketing has changed and we need a new rule book or not, I've arranged, I think, a fantastic panel. I can't imagine a more well-qualified panel of old colleagues and friends to help me dissect this question, hopefully in an entertaining and informative way. The first person I'd like to introduce is Frederick Covington, known as Freddie to her friends. Frederick is the Senior Vice President of and Chief Global Brand and Integrated Marketing Officer at Visa. And Freddie, whom I met many years ago, we were both doing planning jobs, is responsible for future-proofing Visa's brand health and ensuring Visa continues to be one of the most valuable brands in the world, which I'm sure that it is. This includes overseeing Visa's global branding efforts for both business and consumers, physical and digital branding strategies, brand identity, and global brand sponsorship and activation, including other facets of global brand building. She also leads the company-wide effort on purpose branding, which, as I said, can you imagine anyone more well-qualified to talk about this topic? And Freddie, I think it's fair to say, she's almost a walking definition of a global citizen. Every member of her family holds a passport from a different country. So there you go. Thank you for joining us, Freddie. Second to introduce to the panel, welcome to the panel, is Amy Wu, another old colleague of mine from other days. Now, Amy is currently Executive Director and Head of Group Strategic Marketing and Communications at DBS Bank Hong Kong. And Amy has got so many fantastic things that she's done throughout her career. She's passionate and about creating social impact through innovation, activation, and storytelling. She's also a big fan of driving sustainability and eager to do more in this space. She also happens to be an avid mahjong player that I've sat around the table with once, or been in the background once while she was playing. And she's hosted a mahjong tournament for the past 20 years. And sadly, it was cancelled in 20 and 21. and she's hoping to bring it back in 2022. Part of her community engagement, I'm sure, which is very valuable. Now, the last, we had to have a token male. So we've got Lyndon Morant, who's another old colleague of mine from WPP days. So Lyndon, welcome. Lyndon is the Asia Marketing Director for Integrated Marketing Communications at Colgate and Palmolive. Lyndon started his career at Mindshare, which is where I met Lyndon, and he's done various roles all around the world: London, Shanghai, Tokyo, and Hong Kong, working with a whole bunch of awesome brands: Nike, Dyson, Booking.com, and LVMH, which is where I had some super fun with Lyndon. And he made the jump into marketing to join Colgate Palmolive as Asia Director, Marketing Director for Integrated Marketing Communications, responsible for advertising and media, and at a transformative time for the FMCG giant. He lives in Hong Kong with his wife and young son, who may make a cameo appearance during this webinar, as he was doing just in the last few minutes. Interesting fact about Lyndon: he once played a fairy for the English National Opera's production of Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. When you meet Lyndon, he's about 6'4". He's pretty muscled up guy. So him playing a fairy kind of beggars belief. But anyway, there you go. Okay, so trivia out of the way. Let's get serious. So first question to Amy. You heard my monologue, Amy. You've worked with some of the biggest brands out there in big roles. What are, thinking about perhaps back to that time of Nike or anyone else you care to mention, what do you think are the most powerful tools in their toolkit, and has it changed?
Sure. Hi, Ed. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I was with Nike for 10 years, right? I joined Nike in 2007. I still remember one of the very first big marketing meeting that I joined was to attend the Beijing 2008 Olympics kickoff meeting. That was one of my very first big meeting. To date, I still remember the power of Nike athletes and the stories behind them that struck me. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay, so this is the way Nike, does marketing. It's the power of sports, the power of athletes, right? And I still remember, I'm sure a lot of you still do, the unexpected moment that Liu Jiang had to withdraw, from the Olympics, right? And how Nike turned around this disappointing moment into such an inspiration, which was so in tune with the sentiment of, the China audience, at that moment, which was, to love sports, even if it hurts, right? Switching the conversation from withdrawal to sportsmanship and to the, passion about sports. And I thought that was brilliant. And that's like my very first and yet the most powerful Nike moments that I had. And therefore, if you ask me, what are the most powerful tools that Nike uses? And I would say it's their athletes, right? And the stories behind these athletes, the powerful images of the athletes. And I don't think this will ever change. And another thing is activations, right? So inspiring people to participate in sports. Nike's, making athletes, meaning everybody, because in Nike, they say everyone has a body as an athlete, making people better through grassroots activation is something that I don't think it will change in Nike. And yet, what has changed though is the how, right? Like marketing shifting to digital platforms definitely changed the how we do marketing. Like besides brand awareness, like how does Nike leverage on athlete stories and images to drive engagement and traffic and conversion online? I mean, today, 50% of Nike's traffic, 50% of Nike's revenue comes from the digital platform, right? And then on activation, like today it's impossible to host large scale activation anymore. And Nike brought activations actually online with the You Can't Stop Us campaign last year, during the COVID time, right? Asking influencers, asking consumers to upload videos online on, how they continue to work out at home. And I thought that's brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, all of that stuff sounds absolutely fantastic. Maybe let's come back to some of those themes about really what has changed in there, or maybe is it just a new application of some, classic old thinking. So let me go to Lyndon. So Lyndon, you've also worked on Nike, as I mentioned before, in your history. You may want to challenge some of those things that Amy said. I'll leave that totally up to you. Anyway, other than that, though, I did want to talk about your current role, because I think Colgate is one of those brands that's almost like made an art form or a science anyway out of this kind of really rigorous proof point style communication, which is famously super effective, maybe not necessarily so entertaining. But recently there's been a shift in some of those stories into much more kind of humanistic, big stories that seem to want to be a bit more emotional rather than, you know, leaving a bit of blood on the apple. So to you, Lyndon, I mean, is there a shift? What's going on at Colgate, and what's the Colgate view on this thorny question?
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for having me. You know, great to be here and participate on this panel. Amy, I remember that campaign from 2008 when I was inducted on the Nike brand, and even hearing that line, "Love sport, even when it breaks your heart," it almost makes my heart sing a little bit. So thanks for kind of bringing that emotional memory back. I think, Ed, to your question about the style of storytelling that we now apply at Colgate, you know, we realized pretty recently that if all we talk about is Jules ink and arginine and blood on an apple, it's a bit like throwing toothpaste against the wall and seeing what's going to stick. So we recognized that every time we talk about functional proof points, we are borrowing against the equity of the brand. And you see the brand's equity is a bit like cash in the bank that's been built up over so many years of doing great work and building trust and loyalty and repeat usage and maybe even love. And when we borrow against that equity, eventually it goes down. And we've been doing way too much of the functional proof points and not enough reinvestment back in who are we and what do we stand for. And so we did a bunch of work over the past 3 to 4 years and re-established our core brand spirit and our belief, which is that we believe everybody deserves a future that they can smile about. And so what motivates us, and being able to communicate motivation, I think, is so important. What motivates us is trying to empower people to see the future optimistically. And that optimistic courage and determination is represented by the Colgate smile. And so that's a message that's going to take time to embed and constant reinvestment to remind people that the Colgate smile is different, that it means something that's different from the rest of the category. And so that's what we've been doing in terms of a shift from functional to more emotional equity building storytelling.
So that, just based off what I'm hearing from you two, from Amy and yourself, Lyndon, is that it's really about human stories. It's about capturing that emotion. It's about finding a legitimate role for the brand in that emotion. And if you do that in a big, effective medium that's perhaps very visual, then, you know, ka-ching, that's how it works. I don't hear anything there about changing the rule book of marketing in terms of what I'm thinking. So let me go to the troublemaker here, Freddie Covington. Now, Freddie, in our I've got to warn everyone on the call. Freddie,
how did I get this label?
Freddie, just don't start defending yourself, Freddie. Just hang on. So on these kind of warm-up calls, Freddie's like, it's all changed, it's all out. So Freddie, you've got all the t-shirts, literally. You worked at Microsoft, you've been a planner, you've been selling the power of emotion advertising for years. Are you now saying that it's all changed, you're throwing everything out? What's going on, Freddie? Do you agree with these two learned colleagues, or where are you going?
Well, first of all, I would like to know from Lyndon if I have a Colgate smile. That would be nice.
We'll get back to you.
We'll get back to me. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. You know, I think, you know, you and I have training as a planner, and once a planner, you're always a planner. Why? Because you love understanding people and you love to know what makes them tick. So human stories, values, emotion, that is foundational. So absolutely, I think these things never go away. You know, putting on my planner and strategy hat throughout the years, as well as today, I would say that what I think is very different is the consumer. So whilst these foundational desires are the same, we all want to belong, we all want to share our stories, we all have emotions that we hope can unite us around the world. We see that the type of consumer that is out there is different. And even the word consumer, I think, is needs to be abolished. I think that I would just say that the type of people and what they want from brands, what they want as a result from marketing is different. We talk about the rise of the conscious person, the conscious consumer. We see rising demographics of individuals that are really reevaluating what matters to them in their personal lives, and as a result, what matters to them in the relationship that they have with brands. People are driven by new commitments, and they want to make purchase decisions that align with their values and emotion. But even further to that, they also want to align with brands and companies that they feel have positive social, economic, and environmental impact. So I'd say, 10 years ago, that was, some niche brands took, position on that, and the Patagonias of the world, the Body Shops. But what we're seeing now, this massive wave of the conscious consumer has come of age, and people are willing to spend more for a product or company that they think reflects their values and is making this positive impact. And importantly, they're also very willing, and they demonstrate pretty much every day that they're very willing to also create movements against those brands if they are not demonstrating the right values. So there's both an opportunity and a pretty significant risk. So we're seeing in this type of new consumer the rise of, equality, sustainability, advocacy, and a desire for much stronger ethical business practices, including financial inclusion, privacy, and trust. So if I pull back and I look at the years that, I've been working in marketing and doing planning, I think that that's the big change, is the customer that we serve is different. And while there are some fundamental needs that remain the same, the game is different to meet the moment of who that conscious consumer is.
But just to kind of challenge that a bit, Freddie, because this is a call where we're going to be challenging things. I don't think this is the first time in the world that people are saying that, brands are aligning with values. The Marlboro man, he might not have been a good man, but that was a whole business built around alignment of values, people aligning with the values of outdoorism and everything like that. Car brands, sport brands, since the beginning of marketing, it's the whole business of branding is about aligning with the values. Maybe people are more aware of global issues nowadays, but I don't hear anything there that's changing the marketer's toolkit. So when you're saying things are changing, you're saying that the toolkit remains the same. It's just that people are becoming a bit more kind of globally aware. That doesn't sound like a huge change.
Well, I like the face. We didn't practice that, but that's a good ad. No, I think that the rise of this conscious consumer is changing the toolkit. So, if we think about the classic P's and, positioning, figuring out, what is the tagline for your brand. I think a lot of the tools that we had before were very, I would say, brand centric. They were all about positioning the company, positioning the brand. They were all about establishing the differentiated proposition in the category. And what we're seeing today is, this new P, this purpose P coming up. And I think that that's a game changer. So it's less about understanding what is good for the company and the product, but more what is good for the world. So, when you talk about the shift, to purpose, the difference is also the scale of experience that is occurring. Before, in the Marlboro man, it was just, me and my outdoorsy interests. What we're seeing now is people, rethinking that scale of experience to ask themselves, is what I'm doing as an individual impacting the total positive, outcome for the world? And we see 75% of millennials are willing to change their consumption habits to reduce impact on the environment. 60% of all Gen Zs and millennials say that if companies don't take a stand on issues such as human rights, race relations, or even LGBTQ equality, they will shun that brand. That is a very fundamental difference from the consumerism that we saw before and the marketing tactics that we use, which were just about positioning to the product and positioning to the one individual. I think now we need to position to society and to the world, and that's a very marked difference in my mind.
All right, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let me get maybe a comment from Amy on that. I would just suggest that way back, before all of this kind of new talk about positioning being a fifth P, there was the North Face, which I think was established in 1968, 1971. It was all built around a purpose. I think Nike itself, Amy, you were talking about Nike had a purpose, you know, the founding belief, if you're a body, you're an athlete. That was also in the 70s. I mean, is this new, or is this just kind of new PR for something that's always been there? Amy, what do you think?
The fifth P, purpose, has always been there. It's just that I think because the consumers, I agree with Freddie that the consumers, you know, have become a lot more socially conscious, and therefore a lot of the companies and a lot of the brands have dialed that the fifth P up a lot nowadays. I mean, if you look back in the olden days, maybe some companies do it, and they don't do it as frequent as, you know, today, right? And a lot more companies are talking about sustainability. They're talking about, you know, purpose. And I just think that is because of the shift in consumer. This P has been, you know, dialed up significantly. I don't think, you know, fundamentally it has changed a lot. It's just that, you know, the weights has shifted.
Okay, but if we're saying that the big change is consumers now have more global awareness, more global consciousness, which I think we would agree is the case. You know, environmental concerns have certainly driven that. You know, I think we can all see that in the data, as Freddie just plucked those statistics out of the air when she was talking. So we know that that's the case. But if that's the extent of it, then that really means that, well, okay, so the marketer's toolkit maybe just needs to accommodate more of a kind of a global awareness. But I'm thinking that also about the article that came out 1 or 2 weeks ago. I think it was in Marketing Magazine. It was the global marketing director, I think, for KFC, who said, what's all this purpose nonsense? There's a whole lot of brands that don't need a purpose, and consumers don't want them to have a purpose. A fried chicken leg doesn't have a purpose. It's just a fried chicken leg. So he's saying, just don't, you know, marketers are getting lost. They're getting lost in their whole dreams about this. So Lyndon, can you help what's your point of view on this? Do all brands need a purpose, and is that the extent of the change, or is there something bigger going on in terms of marketing toolkit?
Yeah, it's a great debate. I mean, firstly, I'm vegan, so I don't think there's anything good about a fried chicken.
You are. I never doubted that. The minute I saw that ponytail, I knew.
Yeah, there it is. So yeah, I could see how purpose is definitely being revisited. I mean, I've experienced that myself at Colgate Palmolive, as I just explained for brand Colgate. But for me, the marketing playbook, if we call it that, it has a chapter 1. And what does that chapter 1 talk about? Well, I think that chapter 1 is still going to talk about the same stuff, which is going to be, what are the values? What are the values of the company and the values of the brand? Because that's really going to define the behavior of that brand and affect all of the P's if you include profit within this and purpose within this. It's those choices, what to say and what not to say, should be informed by values. And I think that's been consistent since the dawn of time. For me, the thing that's changed the most, and we're touching on it a bit with this idea of new consumer, or at least a heightened consciousness for the same consumer. It's just that there's more of them, right? I'm a child of the 80s. I'm not going to say which year in the 80s, but in 1980, the global population was 4.4 billion people. Today, it is approaching 8 billion, probably by the end of this year. So the global population's almost doubled in the last 40 years. And with that, the addressable market, the number of people we can actually speak to, has also dramatically increased. So back in 1980, probably the only time you could reach as many of those 4.4 billion people as you could would have been via the Olympics or something, which is what Visa has been sponsoring for so long. But today, Facebook has 10 million active advertisers on its platform, 10 million people advertising in the same newsfeed to their 2.7 billion users. So there's way more people. Disciplines like global marketing didn't even exist until globalization took off. And so the mechanisms for executing marketing, of course, had to evolve. But I see those as later chapters in the history and the story of marketing. But for me, chapter 1, the introduction, still the same, still about values.
So maybe we switch to the role of technology a little bit, which is how kind of Amy started off, talking about how you have these great events, but perhaps they're kind of channeled differently. And as I said in my opening remarks, I mean, there's no doubt that digital platforms, because we're all carrying around phones, we're looking at our phones a lot. But the question is that just a shift in the media channels? Like, you know, there's always been change in media, you know, since, you know, before radio, then there was radio, then there was TV, and then there was all this stuff. So are we just seeing a continual evolution in different media choices, or are the strategies that marketers need to reach all these people on Facebook, Lyndon, do we need entirely different strategies? I mean, are the old ideas of emotion and storytelling, do they fit to the Facebook era, to small view spaces on people's phones? Freddie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that technology has always, you know, changed at different times. There's a very interesting book that I'm reading right now called Quantum Marketing, and they make the point that there are 5 paradigms of marketing. The first one really being in the 80s, you know, anchored on product marketing. And that's where we saw, you know, a lot of the, you know, trades and things that we learn in marketing school happen, you know, the premise of logic and rationale and RTBs, right? And not much technology. Paradigm number 2 happening in the 80s, you know, the rise of emotional marketing, and it's all about emotion and sort of laddering up to your P&G, you know, top benefit. Not a lot of data there. And then see the rise of paradigm 3, which is the data-driven marketing age, really coming on in the 90s, where we see the advent of the internet, digital media, and data, and probably over pivoting to what Mark Pritchard has said, you know, too much programmatic and just micro-targeting as a result, and really not building brands with the whole suite of you know, human stories that we talked about. Paradigm number 4, which is a paradigm that we are in today, all about digital and social media marketing, with a lot of sort of actualization of some of these earlier technologies. But I think what's interesting is the 5th paradigm, which is, this also talks about quantum marketing, which was going to harness different kinds of technologies and therefore give us as marketers different opportunities, certainly with AI and much more predictive analytics in the model of an Amazon, to predict what consumers want, to predict what messages are going to resonate. And I think that that's something to look forward to, and something that we really need to be thinking about.
I mean, who can argue with that? I mean, I think that book from Ranjar is super interested. I'm also interested in that concept of quantum marketing. I mean, how can you not be in this age of data? But again, I come back to the same question though. If we say that really the core concepts of what we practice as marketers is really, we're trading in emotion, aren't we? That's I guess is how this discipline has grown up, and that everything is really about product substantiation, product features, in order to substantiate an emotional benefit, an emotional relationship with the customer. And the idea of a brand is that body, that structure that wraps together the contract with the customer. You've got your emotion, you've got your function, and all that kind of stuff. So brand has been the predominant demand generation concept that arguably we have been using for 50, 70 years, right, in this kind of industrial age. Arguably, though, what has happened, as I said, the growth in Facebook, the growth in e-commerce in China, the growth in Salesforce, I would argue that their proposition is that actually they're not going to say that you don't really need these things, but they're saying that you can use other things instead of brand. Instead of pulling people into your brand, you use technologies to go and find them, and you can use product USPs. I mean, in China and e-commerce, it's really the new age of product marketing is going back to the 80s. Brands don't even really need to exist. You can just have a label and an influencer and a product, and you sell. So I'm asking, really, that seems to be what's going on. All of the businesses that are growing are the ones that are not really using brand as their major engine. So hence my question.
I think that's completely ridiculous. Brand is at the heart of the business models. And it's because that business and the products are so strong that their brand speaks for themselves, and that they don't have to do marketing. Now that is pretty genius when you're a platform of that. You know, most of the top brands in the top 5 of the Brand Z Interbrand ranking are all platforms. And it's a huge advantage because they're able to harness their user base to build their brand. But we mustn't
But Freddie, one thing though, in China, what's happened is you've got all of these house brands now. They're inventing their own brands because you don't need to be a famous brand to make a lot of sales. You just need to look competent, and you can be pushed by an influencer. That's my point.
But so they are still brands.
What's ridiculous?
But what's ridiculous is to say that they are they're subsuming the technology in place of brand. They're actually using their technology to build brand. The technology, the product itself is the brand. So I think it's important to make the difference. We shouldn't, have people take away that brand building is no longer important because you can use technology in place of brand. That's what I'm putting the finger on.
And
okay,
can I add on? Can I add on to something? I mean, yes, of course, e-commerce in China, Taobao, you can get a pair of shoes, for $10 US, $20 US, the price range is there. The reason why Nike can sell a pair of sneakers for $200 US is because of the brand. So I agree completely with Freddie is, brand building is still in the heart of marketing. If there's no brand, then how can a brand, continue to sustain?
Amy, it warms my heart to hear you say that because I'm a brand devotee. But couldn't we say, though, that one challenge to this whole idea of the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps, if we add purpose as a 5th P, which I think is ridiculous. But anyway, that's in the 1 P. I think that's Lyndon's point of view. But if you say one of the big challenges would be in China, Mark Pritchard, which I think, Freddie, you brought up, right? He had this point. He's just got awarded by the WFA, which is the body that Ranjha, who wrote the book about quantum marketing, he's the president of that organization that I'm also actually on the board of that company. But then he won the Marketer of the Year. And one of the things he said, if you want to look to the future of marketing, look to China. And in substantiating that point, he said, the old model of brand building is out. It's all about programmatic actualization. And it's all about influencers. So my point is, I want to go back because I feel like we're dodging the question a bit. Brands were a device to pull people toward a company, right? I think arguably the new model is using technology plus influencers, like a rented equity, to go and find your customers with technology, and then you get authority with them through the influencer. You don't necessarily need to be a famous brand to make the sale. Doesn't that challenge the fundamentals of the marketer's toolkit as we are talking about?
I think it's difficult to agree conclusively with that statement because LVMH, Nike, I think they would argue quite thoroughly that you do need a big brand with a heritage and a history. In the case of that category, at least luxury or sportswear, Li-Ning don't do as well as Nike in China. Like, why is that? It's because people are inspired by LeBron James and Cristiano Ronaldo. They're not so inspired by whatever activities Li-Ning was doing, even though Li-Ning has competitive advantage ostensibly just by being Chinese and being on the platforms that helped it to grow. So I think there's a lot of, you mentioned the word equity borrowing just now. There's a lot of dodgy stuff going on that just because you have a good double 11 doesn't mean that you're going to have a good 11 years. And a lot of short-termism. A lot of these brands are going to be funded with private equity capital that are going to be demanding profit, and it's unclear as to whether they're going to be profitable for long term. And are they even brands, or are they just products that are selling themselves on the cheap, on the quick?
Yeah, I think Lyndon touches on something very important, which is the difference between product and brand. And at the heart of this debate is really trust, which is really the bedrock for unlocking growth. You can throw a lot of influencers at a product and make it trend for a while, but are you going to have sustained, growth and really build trust over time? That's what a brand does. And, the numbers are compelling. Brands that have high trust index compared to others grow at 115% faster than others. So that's also the argument for building brand versus, just the cheap trick of, I have an average product, I just get a great influencer. That's a one-trick pony. the building trust over time, having, values for your brand that align with the corporate values of your leaders, making a difference in society, giving back. These are fundamental things that I think are on the table. And just a little bit more, I think, on that change, not to debate the P's, but I think the intent of marketing is very different. In the past, the intent of marketing was all about building profile and reputation. So it was very self-centered on the organization. Today, what we're seeing is people want, from marketing, the catalyzation of collective action. And so the intent of marketing is about accelerating change and mobilize. That is very different. It's very external focused. So influencer, no influencer, the end game has to be looked at in a very different way, from a profile, reputation, internal motivation to an accelerating change and mobilization and collective action. Those are the changes we should be looking at and thinking about.
Can I build on that with a question back to you, Freddie? But if you think about this notion of influence and where it comes from, and those brands are the greatest brands in the world, potentially. I'm looking at a brand like Bulgari, for instance, who over the years has partnered with so many famous celebrities that became iconic. Audrey Hepburn with Tiffany, for example, or even visionary leaders like Elon Musk or Sheryl Sandberg with Facebook, who are tied to the identity of a company. Do you think that brands and companies need to actually look within to find what is it about us that could and should be influential, instead of going to the outside and literally buying influence temporarily on a set contract along with a dozen other brands for something that ultimately doesn't contribute to their own equity?
I love that question, and I want to give you my best Colgate smile for it. I absolutely love that question.
Great smile. Yeah.
I think that the most important, I would say, influence, equity line borrowing area is not from those influencers or from those celebrities. It's actually should be from the CEOs that have profile, that do what they say, that are leading by example, that are implementing hiring and recruiting practices that are really in line with diversity. That's a trendy topic. Those that really walk the talk. I think that that's where we're going to find, the younger consumers digging in for the real influence, and they're going to be using that as the benchmark more so than just borrowing, the celebrity or the influencer of the moment, which is just a short-term equity steal, really. But how are the executives living up to the values of the brand? I think the scrutiny is going to become higher and higher, and I love that question. Amy?
And I think, Freddie, and I think it's not only the CEO, I think part of marketing is internal marketing is very important, right? I think, everybody within the organization should be actually, the brand ambassadors, right? If we can motivate, internally, to mobilize our staff, to be our brand ambassadors, that will make the brand even more credible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping for a day, my daughter's 18 years old, like, how's she going to choose where she works? I think she's not going to choose it based on how I chose it, which is the brand great? Do they pay well? Can I have a career? I think she's going to choose it based on, is it an ethical company? Who are the leaders and what values do they live by? I think that is really, really changing. And I think that's going to lead to different scorecard altogether.
But to get back to this question of whether, this thing about the CEO being important, again, I feel like CEOs from time to time been a big part of advertising campaigns going way back. Again, I'm not sure that's a new idea. Maybe consumers want more transparency, but it doesn't feel like a new playbook, though, does it?
It's not.
It just feels like maybe more emphasis.
But it's not about making them part of the advertising idea. It's making them part of the actual actions and commitments that the company is making. So that
CEOs have always been part of actions of companies. I don't think that's a new thing either. It just feels like, I don't know.
I think it's very different. I think it's very different, Ed. I think that, just, a couple decades ago, CEOs were just, getting fat paychecks, acting in very unethical ways and getting away with it. I think today it's very different. When you look at the BCG framework, where they talk about company needing to be in the be, do, say, you've got to be ethical, you've got to act ethically, and you have to say that you're ethical. And that's the new shift. Is before they could just be in the say, put on a really great campaign. I mean, look at the advertising that was put on by the Essos of the world and all of those oil companies, and they could just say it. Well, now what's happening is those CEOs are being held to account by environmentalists, and now they're look at Total. They're having to completely rebrand to Total Energies. That's a very new level of accountability, and I think it gives us a lot of hope for the world.
There's definitely more transparency aided by the internet. People can go and find out all kinds of things, but I think that's been around for some time. I wanted to ask about, are we in the marketing industry at risk of saying one thing and doing another? So here, the four of us, we're all talking about, no, brands aren't dead. Everyone jumped down my throat when I even suggested that might be the case. But in terms of your own operations, and if we take Peter Field and Lesbian A, which is a data-driven exercise where they look at the effectiveness, and they say 70% of marketing is most effectively used when it's at long-term brand building, and then 30% in tactical. I really wonder if that is the case in any company's operations. I mean, maybe in Nike, maybe in the luxury brands it is, because those things are totally brand driven, but it certainly isn't the case at Cathay. I would have a very hard time, I think, convincing the people at Cathay that 70% of our marketing spend should be on brand building. I mean, it's really the other way around. I wonder if it's the case in where you work, or if you don't want to talk about your own company, but what you've heard about from other places. I'm just trying to get at whether or not in the marketing industry we're kind of like romanticizing ourselves. We're drinking the Kool-Aid. We love to talk about brand in these conferences, and then we go back to the reality where agencies are declining because actually companies around the world are not really that interested in creativity, but they're super interested in marketing automation. They're super interested in programmatic and little kind of ads that chase you everywhere around, wherever you go on the internet. These two things are not really compatible with what we're saying and what maybe we're doing. Is this true?
We've definitely been influenced by Bennett and Field's work. What I would say to Bennett and Field, not that they're here, but to the work, is that it is a good data set, but it's only focused on the winners. So there's probably examples of brands who have followed the exact same strategies, but who did not win. So it's not an average of all brands. It's only looking at a small data set. So I think that's something for us to bear in mind. So it can be instructive and perhaps inspiring, but I think when it comes down to rules, that gets a little bit risky. But again, we have been influenced by Bennett and Field, and we did look into it. I'm happy to say that today we spend about 30% of our media investment on equity building campaigns and initiatives. And the rest
That's a long way short of the 70% though, isn't it? I mean, if you're kind of influenced by Bennett and Field, I mean, it's hard to really... Well,
it influenced in so much as it raised the conversation. And prior to that, it was zero. So
right.
It's a journey, and every brand is different. Every brand operates under different circumstances. And
I mean, did people see that? I think it was pretty brave of Adidas to come out. I think it was last year. They said they did econometric modeling, and actually they realized that a lot of the things that they thought that the Salesforce and all those kind of MarTech companies told them that they had to do, because that's modern marketing. Maybe they told the CEO, and the CEO told the CMO, hey, stop running all these ads and start doing programmatic. They actually found that actually the effectiveness of programmatic was a lot less than what they'd been led to believe, and they actually found that brand building was contributing a lot more to the sales, although it's harder to measure. So maybe, is there an attribution problem that's behind this kind of confusion that the marketing industry seems to have? Or on the one hand, we say it's about emotion, storytelling, and branding, but in actually daily life, it's really not what we're doing. Freddie or Amy, you got a point of view?
I think it's the wrong question. If you ask, is it brand versus performance? That's the wrong question. It's performance through brand. And if you ask, is it growth versus good, which, you know, now is a topic that we're being asked in the boardroom all the time. The answer is, it's not growth or performance, growth or good. It's, you know, purpose-led performance. So it's how do we make sure that these things are kind of merged for the right purpose, as opposed to opposing them.
But Freddie, would you agree though? But Freddie, would you agree that the Visa kind of Running Man thing, which was so popular, I mean, that is a really kind of a classical story-based, high engagement kind of story. That's very different from the kinds of things you see in programmatic ad buys. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and you know, I think it's a problem if, and again, I think we see some, you know, Mark Pritchard has talked about it, which is if you over pivot on just performance, you see huge damage to your brand. And if you're building the brand without any product substantiation and not giving people an understanding of what your solutions are, I think that that's also going to be an issue. But we've talked a little bit, Amy referenced Nike. I think that's a model of brand building that is also driving performance. And so the dream for marketers is not to create dichotomy between these concepts, but to find a way that one leads to the other. Beautiful brand storytelling with wonderful product integration drives performance, in the same way that doing, you know, good with your brand will drive growth. So a lot of, I think, of what we need to do as leaders is to reconcile complicated concepts that tend to be opposed. Certainly, you know, when you're in front of the CFO, so, well, you know, what are you going to pick, A or B? Is helping, you know, reconcile the notions and say, well, it's A that leads to B, or it's with B and A, and it's not as simple as just opposing those things. And that's why it's very hard to do what we do, and it takes a little bit of gray matter. It's not all white or black.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I just, maybe to the people listening on the call, on the seminar, if you want to send in some questions, do so now. We're gonna wrap it up at 2, so we're gonna go to your questions. But before I do that, I just want to go to Amy for any kind of reply on this topic. You know, are we kind of deluding ourselves? I mean, I think your last conversation, I think you equated modern marketing to programmatic. I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue, Amy, or if that was not really what you think.
Well, the two things are not mutually exclusive. I mean, to be honest, right? With digital and everything, yes, you know, we need to do performance marketing, right? But then that's more short term, right? I mean, when you're a marketer, you don't just look at, you know, short term, you know, sales performance. I mean, building the brand, you know, for the longer term, you know, it is our job as well, right? So definitely with performance marketing, I think, you know, it makes our conversation with CFOs, you know, as Freddie said, a little bit more challenging, because it's always, you know, these questions. So I think it is, you know, our jobs, you know, to help, you know, build that balance, the long term and the short term. I think, you know, again, performance and brand, they need to be together. Otherwise, there's you can't build loyalty, you know, with the customers.
I love a harmonizing answer. That's fantastic. I just think that at the end of the day, you have to pick a kind of a format of media, and there are some choices, right? Not everything is equally brand building in terms of media choices, but I guess. But
Ed, this is Asia. We're all about harmony. It's all about the yin and the yang. That is how we do marketing.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I just feel like are we being too polite? Is the reality a little more blunt? Anyway, I'm going to go to questions.
I think when you're right is it's really hard. And, you know, all of us in this trade know how much pressure we're under. And with COVID and with all the difficulties that we've seen and businesses folding, you know, and you're on the front line, we talk about this all the time. It's harder to reconcile that tension. And there is a lot of pressure to go for immediate returns that could then offset, you know, long-term benefits to the brand. But we must hold on to the data that we have. We have longitudinal data. Every time there's been a crisis, if you de-invest in your brand, only after 12 months, you will see what happens. It happens really, really fast.
So a quick one before we go to questions, I want to ask a very quick one, because I think it was interesting. This Adidas and then Airbnb, they said they changed their marketing weighting and their messaging strategy after they did econometric analysis, which at Cathay we haven't yet done, but we are planning to do to help answer this question about what's working, what's not working. But for you guys, can you just give me a quick answer? Are you doing econometric modeling at your place to help you know really what's working, or is it how are you doing it?
Yeah, we are. We've just rekindled that, but we needed to create a format that operated at the speed of advertising and media today. So work like MMMs used to take 6 months, a year, and now we're looking at formats to do that much quicker and much more efficiently.
Yeah. It's probably showing that the green apple with the blood on it still works super well, right?
No, not at all, actually. Like what it's showing is that without brand, there is no performance. So the investment in brand.
Put him on a poster.
Boom.
You're the poster child of marketing. I love it. Okay.
It halos onto everything else, makes everything else work harder. That's the big lesson.
For sure. Got to measure it though. So Freddie, so are you guys at Visa? I'm sure you're doing it. You're like light years ahead, right?
We're like got data brains through the wazoo. I mean, economics models are just basically statistical models that allow you to understand the relationship between different variables. As a data-led company, we process 3 billion transactions every day. So that is.
Freddie, I've got to get the questions. Just a yes or no.
Yes, and we also share that with governments around the world. So I mean, it's a yes, and it's also stated importance to purpose, which is we share it with governments to help them understand where is the economy going, which sectors are going to recover, how fast, why not, and that's why it's very valuable.
Cool, Amy.
Well, I'm in the banking industry now, right? So data-driven. I cannot start my presentation without data. So I think sure. Definitely yes. That's the short answer I want to give you.
All right, now let me just get through a couple of these questions. Can I just send this first one on purpose? Because Freddie, you were talking about purpose a lot. Question from Andrea saying, haven't we dialed up too much toward purpose? At the same, hang on, I need my glasses, sorry. Too much more purpose. The more that permeates in the market, the more people will want to know about the actual product and service benefits. Have we gone? Freddie, is it too much of what you're talking about? Is it just gone over the
I thought the chicken leg analogy was really, good fun, and I know you use that for effect, but what kind of purpose are we talking about? We're not looking at giving a chicken leg purpose. We're looking at giving a company purpose, right? And what does it stand for? And what is its position in the world? I don't think that can be overstated. And I think that we're going to find that fundamentally, the way that entrepreneurs are creating businesses in the future is going to be all about purpose. And it's going to be about, why do I want to create a business? What change is it going to make? What good is it going to drive in the community? Those are going to be new questions that fundamentally put purpose on top, not as a marketing tactic and not for purpose washing, but for understanding fundamental economic activity and its role in our world. So that's my view.
Okay, good. Thank you for
that.
Can
I add on to that? I have a piece of data. Sure. I remember a survey from Edelman that did last year, right? 70% of people think if they perceive a brand that is putting profit over people, they will lose trust in the brand forever. That's always a data point that always is forever. So it's a long-term damage.
I think that's the second billboard after the one that Lyndon said. That's a good one. Yeah, I love that. Okay, question to Lyndon. It's to all panelists, but I'm going to direct this to you, Lyndon. Seems to me one of the biggest changes in marketing is speed, immediacy, transparency. I really think this is the case too. And the resulting lack of control that brands now have. Perhaps they never did, but at least things moved slowly enough so you had time to think about interventions. What is that? Is that something that the marketer's toolkit needs to be, like a kind of digital handbrake or like dynamic control? Things are moving so much faster. Do we need new skill sets to be able to manage this, Lyndon?
Yeah, firstly, Casper, thanks for joining. I hope you're well. Yeah, it's a great question. The volume of content that we need to make at the speed that it needs to be made at demands technologies that do things in an automated fashion, like dynamically. What that really means is there's no human oversight for a lot of this stuff. And again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think it comes back to designing the right master templates, knowing exactly what you want to say, what you don't want to say, and structuring the communications, whether it's content production or media environments, quite meticulously by those rules that represent your values, I think is going to serve you well. So it is a bit of a race, but it shouldn't be a race at all costs.
Okay, great. Amy Wu, to you. Can I ask, this is from Greg Paul, who's of course the honcho at R3, major creative consultancy. Google, Facebook, and Amazon now have 51% of US spend. How much will they have in 5 years' time? 80%? If so, how will the toolkit change? Boom, there it is. That's a good question. I've been trying to get to this. Amy, what do you think? I mean, in other words, we're talking about all this stuff. If the platforms are going to take over, do we need another P, which is like B for begging, to Facebook and Amazon and Google? It's the begging tool. How you can beg favors from those guys. I mean, these are going to be so powerful. What do you think?
Well, there are definitely, platforms that we cannot ignore, I would say, but that doesn't mean that, we only focus on these platforms, right? So I don't think, they can monopolize, the marketing scene. These are the platforms that we need to invest in. But at the same time, I think marketers, right? There's new platforms coming up every day. There's new tools coming up every day. It's about, opening, being open-minded on trying new things. I mean, it's a digital age. I mean, there are so many new tools out there, so many things that there's no harm for us trying. And then we can always, do experimentation, do testing. So I think, in a time like this, we cannot stop learning. We cannot stop seeing what's new out there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it'd be a very sad day indeed, if anything, if that percentage, if we came anywhere close to it. I can't see that happening at all. 51%
Okay.
is too high.
There's another couple of interesting points here. Sorry, go on, Freddie.
Well, I would also add that, we have to be also aware of the geographic fragmentation. So this is still a very sort of globalist view of the world with a couple of platforms that are dominating, but what's happening in China is really what we need to watch. And the development of unique geographic ecosystems, I think we'll see a lot of innovations come through there.
Okay. There's a bit of a kind of a pointy question in the chat. What's the opposite of performance marketing? ? Brand building or waste? Do you think that the notion of performance marketing is even well understood? Love to hear your definitions of it. Who wants to take that one? So in other words, it's funny, isn't it? I think the title of performance marketing is brilliant because it repositions everything else as non-performance marketing.
Performance marketing.
My point of going back to the Ritsons and all these guys is actually when you look at the data, people who have done the econometric modeling shows that actually the branding actually is really the best performer. It's just that you don't see it coming through your Google feed every day because it doesn't kind of click in as easily. But welcome.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think what's interesting is performance marketing is, pay for outcome is really what it's supposed to be. And it was misconstrued as, the only way to get those outcomes was through some kind of, exchange, and digital buys, like the stock market. And what we found, as you rightly said, is, and that's because as marketers, we've had to invest more heavily in very sophisticated MRI models to prove the finance team that actually you could pay for outcome also through brand, and then that was not wastage. So I think we've become more sophisticated to make that argument. And it's a really great question, from Dom, because it may be important to also recognize that all marketing should be performance marketing, not just that digital programmatic layer.
Yeah.
All right, look, we're out of time, everyone. So I just have to wrap this up. But I want to thank you all. I want to thank you, Freddie. I want to thank you, Linda. I want to thank you, Amy, very much for joining. I thought it's been a really kind of super great chat. I wish we could keep going. And I want to thank everyone who joined and asked questions. Sorry, Caspar, I think you wanted to come on and do it on screen, but I kind of did it on your behalf. Sorry about that. a couple of things. Check out the Marketing Society page in LinkedIn. There's some interesting events coming up. 17th of June, 4 p.m. in Singapore. There's a monthly society circle led by the board member there, Dominique Touchard, which is interesting. And then on 8th of July, we've got our 3rd community collaboration session hosted by Kiri Sinclair in Hong Kong. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. Check out the website and links, I think, on this chat as well. You can provide some feedback as to how you felt it all went. Why don't we, there it is, there's a feedback form, please fill it in. I won't do that because I was participating, but hey, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, super fun. Let's do it all again over lunch. I'm buying.
I'll hold you to that. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.